Economic theory has broken down into ideologies that are conflicting. The president articulated sentiments that we all share, but the question is how those sentiments are to be applied. We do live in a society. We do need each other. And there's no question about that, and nobody really disputes that except for some real extreme people. However, the question that has to be asked is, good, we live in a society, but what are our obligations to that society? What is considered contributing your fair share? And to this, what are called the liberal elements of the country are being not only naive, but are being confiscatory to the point where they will choke off the golden goose. I am a product of those who grew up in the 50s and the 60s, the 70s, and the prevailing theory was that the unions would bargain for better and better contracts, and that somehow or other the companies would be able to pay them. What has happened clearly in our times is that all of these companies have failed. What did the government do when GM failed? The government took away the money that had been invested by real people who put their dollars into the company and gave them to the unions. And this is a redistribution of wealth that is unfair. Just as you have to care about the workers, you also should care about the people who put their hard-earned money into an investment. An investment is not a crapshoot, and neither is when a person tries to go to work for a company. And that work's also not guaranteed. If the company goes out of business, the person doesn't have a job. And so the government had no business doing what it did, but it redistributed the wealth of General Motors because of the doctrine of socialism and communism that is prevalent in our universities and in many of the intelligentsia. I was at one time a believer of this doctrine. The doctrine is false. The reason why it's false is because it's unsustainable. Just as Wisconsin would have gone bankrupt had it not changed its relationship with the unions, California is slowly going bankrupt and losing population very rapidly. And it's only a matter of time until it will no longer be able to pay its bills, as is the state of New York. Now, these are things that are quite obvious to anybody who will look at it. The problem is a socialist doesn't want to look at it because of a dirty little secret. What is the dirty little secret of a socialist? That when things go bad and government goes bankrupt, the government will declare that it owns all of the property of the particular state or city or entity, and then will redistribute that according to its wishes. Or better yet, take complete control and make it a government-controlled entity. That is really what lies at the heart of all those who believe in deficit spending, who believe that we can continue on with giving contracts and benefits to people without working, that are just impossible to keep. Because at the core, the belief is that there's enough money in this country that will sustain all of those things if we could only get rid of the wealthy. And that's a fallacy. The people who are wealthy create jobs and create companies. When you confiscate those things, you destroy that energy and that ability to create jobs. Government has not been able to create jobs. Look at Russia. The Soviet Union was not able to create jobs. Communist China's resurgence is primarily because it has adopted a free market principle in many of its areas. That's why it works to a certain degree, besides the forced labor that it has. Economic doctrine, economic theory cannot be divorced from reality. Reality is when people lose their incentives, they don't want to keep going. What does this have to do with being a rabbi? The answer is the Torah talks about what are the obligations of people. And there are two types of obligations, one that's imposed as a standard, and the other is the person's own conscience. What are the standards of government or Torah-imposed responsibility? On certain major elements of staples of life, the Torah demands approximately 23% from the individual. And this goes across the board. All individuals who are not poor, and poverty is determined by the ability to have enough to feed yourself for one full year. So you have to have assets that are the equivalent of being able to feed yourself and house yourself for one full year, whatever that is on average for your family. That's the level of poverty. Anything below that level, you're not obligated to pay those things to a certain degree. At least part of the responsibilities. There are other responsibilities that you do have to give, some of the 10th and so on, you do have to give. But 23% is approximately how much an average person, including a rich person, must give. So then if there is not a progressive obligation from the Torah, what then is the obligation of the rich person? The answer is that the rich person is obligated to give charity. Charitable contributions, besides taxation, is up to the individual. But the standards of the Torah are approximately a little bit over a fifth. That's what you can reasonably expect from everyone. And no one will begrudge you giving you 1/5 of their income, unless they're very poor, at which point, if they don't have the assets to pay for themselves for a year, if they lost their job or they were difficult economic turns, then they're free from those obligations. And that's what the standard should be. There should be an across-the-board tax of approximately 20%, 20 to 23%. However, that 23% was only in certain areas of the economy. Things like making money on lending money, things like investment in houses, things like business, buying and selling, things like livestock and livelihood had other rules. And there, the obligations were far less than 23%. And so, one would have a tax on income of about 20%, maximum 23%, and then capital gains would be approximately 15%, according to the Torah, the way I figured Torah obligations for things that are outside of produce, which was the main element of production in the Torah world, or the biblical world. And so if you have a maximum 23% tax and 15% capital gains tax across the boards, and for those who do not have enough money to sustain themselves for an entire year, saved up or in assets, and those people are free from taxes, that would be a way in which you could have universal standards and you wouldn't be confiscatory. And the idea of returning to the community what you've gotten because you've gotten from other people's contributions, such as firefighters, policemen, road builders, etc., all of those things have to be put into context that the person should have a conscience and should be taught the value of contributing and being a mensch